The alibi was my church, and Julian was its quiet, unknowable God. I'd been coming to this specific pew, third stool from the end, the one with the slight wobble, for the better part of a year. It was a place built of dark wood, the scent of stale beer, and the low murmur of confessions people only made to strangers. I came here to disappear, to let the amber burn of whiskey blur the sharp edges of my own life, a life spent designing houses for other people to live in while mine felt impossibly empty. My days were filled with blueprints and deadlines, my nights with the hollow echo of a quiet apartment. The alibi was the buffer between the two. That night, the edges were sharper than usual. A project I'd poured 6 months of my soul into had been rejected, the client opting for something soulless and prefabricated. It felt like a personal failure, a confirmation of the fraudulence I carried around in my chest. So I was ordering doubles, chasing the burn, trying to outrun the voice in my head that said I wasn't good enough. I was on my 4th, or maybe my 5th. The numbers were getting fuzzy, which was the point, when I signaled for another. Julian was at the other end of the bar, wiping down the counter with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He moved with an economy of motion that I, as a designer of spaces, found endlessly fascinating. There was no wasted energy, no flair, just a steady, grounded presence that seemed to anchor the entire room. He was a big man, not in a bulky way, but solid, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his black button-down shirt and forearms corded with muscle from hoisting kegs and shaking tins. His hair was dark and short. His face was all strong lines and a 5 o'clock shadow that seemed permanent. He was, by all conventional standards, a man's man. And he was, by all accounts, straight. He saw my raised finger, his dark eyes meeting mine across the length of the bar. There was no judgment in his gaze, just a quiet assessment. He nodded once, a barely perceptible dip of his chin, and made his way toward me. I watched him move, watched the way the low lights caught the planes of his face. My heart did a familiar, stupid little flutter. It was the hopeless, secret pulse of my life, this ache for the unattainable. He stopped in front of me, his large hands resting on the worn wood of the bar top. The scent of him cut through the stale air, something clean, like soap and subtle spice. Nothing like the cloying colognes other men wore. It was the scent of just him. Another one, Leo? His voice was a low rumble, a smooth gravel that always seemed to settle somewhere deep in my gut. He remembered my name. He always did. It was a small thing, a professional courtesy, but it felt like a secret treasure every time he said it. I nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. Hit me. He held my gaze for a long moment. I could feel him seeing right through me, past the bravado and into the raw, frayed nerve of my disappointment. He saw the blur I was chasing. Instead of reaching for the whiskey bottle, he picked up a clean glass, filled it with ice from the bin, and topped it with water from the soda gun. A slice of lemon followed, hooked neatly on the rim. He slid it across the bar until it stopped directly in front of my hands. My eyes flicked from the glass to his face. That's not what I ordered. I know, he said, his voice dropping even lower, a private frequency just for the two of us. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the bar. The space between us shrank. I like you clear. My breath hitched. My entire nervous system went on high alert. It was the most intimate thing anyone had said to me in years. Clear. He liked me clear. The words echoed in the sudden silence of my mind, drowning out the self-pity and the professional angst. He didn't just cut me off. He didn't just say I'd had enough. He made it about me, about a version of me he preferred. And then he did something even more unexpected. He stayed. He didn't move on to the next customer or busy himself with polishing glasses. He just leaned there, his dark eyes watching me, waiting. It was a silent challenge, a quiet offer. The choice was mine. Chase the blur, or accept the clarity he was holding out to me. I looked at the condensation beading on the glass of water, then back at his steady, unreadable face. My hand, almost of its own accord, reached out and closed around the cool glass. I took a sip. The water was cold, crisp, shocking. It tasted like surrender, and for the first time all night, I felt my shoulders begin to unclench. That night shifted something between us, or maybe it just shifted something in me. I started going to the alibi not to get lost, but to be found. I nursed club sodas with lime, my eyes tracking Julian as he moved through his domain. I became a student of his quietude, an archivist of his micro-expressions. I learned that the tiny muscle that ticked in his jaw meant he was annoyed with the supplier on the phone. I learned that a faint crinkle at the corners of his eyes, almost invisible, was his version of a genuine smile, usually reserved for one of the old regulars talking about his grandkids. I watched the way his hands worked. They were large and capable, calloused from work, but surprisingly gentle as he placed a drink before a customer or counted out change. I'd watch him build a cocktail, the precise measurements, the sharp, percussive rattle of the shaker, the fluid strain into a chilled glass. It was a craft, and he was a master. He moved like he belonged exactly where he was, a man perfectly suited to his environment. I envied that. I spent my days designing spaces for others to belong, and I felt like a ghost in my own life. He started talking to me more, in the lulls between the rushes. It was never anything deep. He'd ask about my day, and I'd give him the sanitized version. He'd tell me a funny story about a drunk patron from the night before. The conversations were simple, surface level, but they were held together by the thread of his sustained attention. When he listened, he really listened. His gaze never wavered. He wasn't looking over my shoulder for the next customer. He was just there, with me, in that small pocket of time. The touches began so subtly, I thought I was imagining them. When he'd hand me my glass, his fingers would brush against mine, a fleeting warmth that would send a jolt straight up my arm. At first, I dismissed it as accidental, the inevitable consequence of a transaction across a narrow bar. But it kept happening. The contact started to linger, a fraction of a second longer than necessary. A ghost of a touch that my skin would remember long after he'd pulled away. One evening, the bar was more crowded than usual, a loud, boisterous after-work crowd. I was crammed into my usual spot, feeling claustrophobic. Julian was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of black shirt and flying cocktail shakers. I was about to cash out, overwhelmed by the noise, when a hand landed softly on the small of my back. I froze. "You good, Leo?" Julian's voice was right by my ear, a low murmur that cut through the surrounding chaos. His hand was warm and solid against my shirt. It was a grounding touch, a protective one. He was just making sure I wasn't getting jostled, I told myself. That's all it was. But my heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I turned my head to look at him. His face was close, his dark eyes searching mine. "Yeah," I managed, my voice sounding thin. "Just loud." He nodded, his gaze dropping to my nearly empty glass. "Want another soda before you go?" The hand was still there. A firm, warm pressure on my lower back. I could feel the heat of it through the fabric of my shirt, branding me. I was acutely aware of every person in that bar, yet it felt like we were the only two people in the world. This is what I do, I thought. I build narratives from stray glances and accidental touches. I construct entire fantasies from a foundation of wishful thinking. He's just being a good bartender. But then his thumb moved, a slow, deliberate stroke against the fabric. Just once. Up, down. It wasn't an accident. It couldn't have been. It was a secret message passed in a language my body understood, even if my brain refused to believe it. My breath caught in my throat. I just looked at him, wide-eyed, trying to decipher the unreadable expression on his face. A flicker of something, what was it? Apprehension? Hope? Passed through his eyes before his professional mask slipped back into place. He removed his hand, the loss of contact leaving a cold spot in its wake. "On the house," he said, already turning to grab a clean glass. The moment was over, but it had happened. That small, clandestine movement had rewritten the entire history of our interactions. Every casual brush of his fingers, every lingering look, it all clicked into place, forming a picture I was too afraid to look at directly. My mind raced for the rest of the night, a frantic loop of analysis and second-guessing. A thumbstroke. That was it. That was all I had to go on. It was pathetic. I was a grown man, an architect who designed solid, tangible structures, and I was trying to build a future on the ghost of a touch. He was probably just an instinctively tactile person, a friendly guy who knew I was a lonely regular and was being kind. This straight part was the concrete wall I kept running into. I'd heard him talk about dates with women, vague references that were like salt in a wound I insisted on poking. I decided to pull back. I put some distance between us, skipping my nightly ritual for a week. The silence in my apartment was deafening. The edges I'd been trying to smooth out grew jagged and sharp again. I missed the low lights of the alibi. I missed the smell of whiskey and wood. I missed him. It was a physical ache, a hollowness in my chest that no amount of work or distraction could fill. When I finally went back, I felt like a nervous teenager. I took my seat, my hands clammy. Julian was there, of course. A constant. He saw me, and for a split second, his face registered something other than neutral professionalism. It looked like relief. He walked over, his movements as deliberate as ever, but there was a new tension in his shoulders. "Thought you'd found a new church," he said, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't smiling. "Just busy," I lied, my voice tight. "Work." He nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe me. He polished a spot on the bar that was already gleaming. The silence stretched, thick with everything we weren't saying. It was a different kind of silence than we'd shared before. This one was heavy, awkward. "It's quiet tonight," I said, just to say something. "Yeah." Tuesday, he paused, his hands stilling. He looked up and met my gaze directly. "Do you ever?" "I don't know. Get tired of it." The question caught me off guard. "Tired of what?" "The bar." "No." He shook his head, a small, frustrated gesture. "This. The routine. The same faces, the same stories. Don't you ever want to just build something for yourself?" He was using my own language against me. Build something. It was a punch to the gut. He saw me. He saw the emptiness I came here to fill. He knew I designed homes for others and had none of my own. All the time, I admitted, the confession raw and quiet. He held my gaze for a long moment, and in his eyes, I saw a flicker of something I recognized. A deep, resonant loneliness that mirrored my own. The stoic, unreadable bartender was just as lost as I was. That realization was a key turning a lock I didn't even know was there. He wasn't a god in his temple. He was just a man, standing on the other side of a bar, looking for a connection. Just then, the front door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and a trio of loud, obnoxious men in suits. They swaggered up to the bar, their voices booming, shattering the fragile intimacy of our moment. One of them, a beefy guy with a red face, jostled me as he leaned over the bar, shouting for beers. "Watch it," I muttered, instinctively shrinking away. The man turned to me, his eyes alcohol bright and mean. "What did you say to me, princess?" My blood ran cold. The slur, so casual and venomous, hung in the air. I could feel the eyes of the other patrons on us. I wanted to disappear, to fold into myself and vanish. Before I could even respond, Julian was there. He hadn't moved from his spot, but his entire presence had changed. He seemed bigger, harder. The air around him crackled with a dangerous stillness. "He didn't say anything to you," Julian said, his voice flat and cold as steel. It was not the voice I knew. This was something else entirely. "You, on the other hand, need to watch your mouth. And you need to back away from my customer." My customer. The words were a shield. But the way he said them, the protective fire in his eyes, it felt like he was saying my man. The suit guy scoffed, puffing out his chest. "Or what? You gonna hit me with your little cocktail shaker?" Julian didn't even blink. He slowly placed both of his hands flat on the bar, the picture of calm. But it was the most menacing calm I had ever seen. "I'm going to ask you to leave. Once. Then I'm not going to ask." The man's bravado faltered under the weight of Julian's absolute certainty. He looked at his friends, who were suddenly very interested in their shoes. After a tense moment, he grumbled something under his breath and shoved his way back toward the door, his friends scurrying after him. The bar was quiet again, but the air was thick with the aftermath. My heart was still pounding. I was staring at the bar top, my hands clenched into fists. I felt exposed, humiliated. "Leo," I looked up. Julian was watching me, his face etched with concern. The hard edge was gone, replaced by that quiet softness I'd only glimpsed before. "You okay?" he asked, his voice back to its familiar low rumble. I just nodded, unable to speak. I felt fragile, like a poorly constructed model that had just been knocked off a table. He reached across the bar, not with his hand, but with a bar towel. He gently wiped down the spot in front of me, a small, mundane action that felt incredibly tender. His eyes never left mine. "Don't listen to idiots like that," he said softly. "This is your place, too. Your place." He was giving me a home in the only way he knew how. I stayed until closing time. The other patrons trickled out one by one, leaving just the two of us in the quiet, dimly lit room. Julian moved through his closing routine, wiping tables, locking the till, turning chairs upside down. I just sat there, nursing a final glass of water, not wanting the night to end. When he was done, he came and sat on the stool next to me. The bar between us was gone. For the first time, we were on the same side. The silence was comfortable now, a shared blanket. "Thanks," I said, finally finding my voice. "For back there." He just shrugged, but his shoulder brushed against mine. No one talks to my friends like that. Friends. The word was both a comfort and a disappointment. But the way his shoulder stayed pressed against mine felt like more than friendship. "Can I ask you something?" he said, turning to face me. "Anything." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "The way you look at me sometimes. Am I crazy?" Here it is. The precipice. The moment where I can either step back into the safety of denial or leap into the terrifying, unknown freefall of honesty. My throat is dry. My hands are trembling. I am an architect of facades, a builder of empty rooms. Honesty is not my medium. I can't look at him. I stare at my hands, at the faint tremor in my fingers. "No." I whisper, the word barely audible. "You're not crazy." The confession hangs in the air between us, fragile and luminous. I wait for the rejection, for the awkward laugh, for him to say he's flattered, but he's not, that he's straight. I brace for the impact. Instead, I feel his fingers gently touch my chin, tilting my head up until I have no choice but to meet his eyes. His gaze is dark and intense, stripped of all pretense. There's fear in there, I realize. And there's a raw, aching vulnerability that mirrors my own. "Good," he breathes out, the word a puff of warm air against my face. "Because I think I'm going crazy." And then he closes the small distance between us. His lips meet mine, and it's nothing like the desperate, clumsy kisses of my past. This is slow, tentative, a question. His lips are soft, and they taste faintly of the lemon he'd put in my water hours ago. His hand moves from my chin to cup the back of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there. It's a touch that says I've got you. I melt into it. All the fear, the anxiety, the years of lonely yearning just dissolve. My hand comes up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, rapid beat of his heart beneath my palm. It's beating just as fast as mine. This isn't one-sided. This is real. The kiss deepens, becoming more confident, more sure. It's a kiss of recognition, of two solitary people finding their reflection in the other. It's not rushed. It's not hungry. It feels like coming home. When we finally break apart, we just rest our foreheads against each other, breathing the same air. The bar is silent around us, a sanctuary that has witnessed my entire transformation. "Leo," he whispers, his voice thick with emotion. "Julian," I whisper back, testing his name on my lips for the first time without the barrier of the bar between us. We didn't go to his place or mine. He just locked up the bar, and we walked. We walked for hours through the sleeping city, our hands clasped together. It felt so natural, so right, as if our fingers were designed to fit this way. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence was filled with the simple, profound truth of our shared presence. For the first time, I wasn't designing a space for someone else to live in. I was building one for us, right there on the empty pavement, under the glow of the streetlights. We ended up at my apartment. He followed me inside, his large frame seeming to fill the space that had always felt so empty. He looked around at my minimalist furniture, at the rolled-up blueprints leaning against a wall. "This is you," he said, a soft smile on his face. That night, we just lay in my bed, fully clothed, facing each other. He traced the lines of my face with one calloused finger, his touch gentle, reverent. I watched the play of shadows on his face from the city lights filtering through my window. "I've never," he started, then trailed off, shaking his head. "I've always dated women. I thought that's who I was. But then you started coming in, and you were so quiet, so sad. I just wanted to know what was going on behind your eyes. I was just lonely," I confessed. "Me too," he said, his voice a low murmur in the dark. "Right in the middle of a crowded room. Loneliest place in the world." I understood. We were two sides of the same coin. I hid in quiet solitude. He hid in plain sight, surrounded by noise. He reached out, his hand finding mine under the covers, and laced our fingers together. We fell asleep like that. I woke to the smell of coffee. For a disoriented second, I thought I was dreaming. I never make coffee. I grab it from a cafe on my way to the office. I sat up, my heart sinking with a sudden, sickening dread. The other side of the bed was empty. He was gone. Of course he was gone. It was a fluke. A moment of drunken, post-fight adrenaline and shared loneliness. He woke up in the clear light of day and realized his mistake. The familiar, cold tendrils of self-doubt wrapped around my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I was an idiot. I'd built another fantasy on a foundation of nothing. I swung my legs out of bed, the floor cold beneath my feet. I walked into my living room, preparing myself for the crushing emptiness, and stopped dead. Julian was in my kitchen. He had his back to me, wearing the same black shirt from last night, now rumpled. He was standing in front of my coffee maker, which I hadn't used in years, patiently waiting for it to finish brewing. He'd found mugs in my cupboard. He'd found the old bag of coffee beans in my freezer. He had figured it out. He must have heard me, because he turned around. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were soft. He looked tired, but calm. "Morning," he said, his voice gravelly with sleep. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, a mess of relief and fear and hope. He saw the look on my face. He walked over to me, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped right in front of me and gently took my hand. His was warm and solid. "I wasn't a mistake, Leo," he said, as if reading my mind. "I was just trying to figure out your ridiculous coffee machine. And I was trying to figure out how to say this." He took a deep breath. "Waking up this morning, next to you. I felt safe. I haven't felt safe in a long time." Safe. The word landed in my heart and put down roots. It was a foundation. It was something to build on. "Me too," I whispered. He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. "I don't know what this is," he said, his eyes searching mine. "And I don't know where it's going. I'm not. I've never done this before. I might be clumsy at it. I'm an architect," I said, a real smile finally breaking through. "I'm good with clumsy beginnings. We just need a solid blueprint." A genuine smile spread across his face, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "A blueprint, huh?" "Yeah," I said, feeling a surge of confidence I hadn't felt in my entire life. "Rule 1, honesty. Rule 2, more of this." I squeezed his hand. "I can work with that," he said. He led me to the couch, handed me a mug of surprisingly good coffee, and sat down next to me, our knees touching. He picked up one of my rolled-up blueprints from the floor. "What's this one?" he asked, carefully unrolling it across his lap. "It's a cabin," I said, looking at the plans. "For a site upstate. Small. Lots of windows. Built for one person." He studied the drawings for a long time, his finger tracing the lines of the floor plan. He pointed to the single bedroom. "You know," he said, his voice thoughtful, "I think you could fit a bigger bed in here. If you wanted to." I looked from the blueprint to his face, at the quiet hope in his eyes. And I saw our future, sketched out in graphite and possibility. A small cabin. Lots of windows to let the light in. And a bed big enough for two. He started staying over. Not every night. But enough that the silence in my apartment began to recede, replaced by the low rumble of his voice, the sound of his steady breathing next to me in the dark. He had a key. He'd sometimes be there when I got home from work. The smell of something delicious cooking in my kitchen, a space I'd only ever used to make toast. He was building a life in the empty rooms I'd created, filling them with warmth and laughter and the scent of his skin. We didn't go back to the alibi for a while. It felt too strange, too public. That was our old story. We were writing a new one now. But one night, he asked me if I wanted to go. "Are you sure?" I asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "It's my job, Leo," he said gently. "And it's our place. It's where I found you." When we walked in, it felt different. He was holding my hand. He didn't let go until we got to the bar. He walked behind it, into his familiar territory, and I took my stool, our stool. The third one from the end. The wobble felt familiar, comforting. Some of the regulars looked, their curiosity piqued, but no one said anything. Julian got to work, his movements as fluid and efficient as ever. But now, I saw them differently. I wasn't an outsider observing a stranger. I was watching I didn't have a word for it yet, but I was watching him. And every few minutes, his eyes would find mine across the crowded room, and he would give me that almost smile, the one that was just for me. He came over during a lull, leaning on the bar just like he used to. "What can I get you?" he asked, his voice low, a private joke between us. I smiled. "I'll have a water," I said. "I like things clear." His eyes softened, and he reached across the bar, his fingers brushing mine. A current passed between us, as strong as it had been that first time, but different now. It wasn't a spark of uncertain hope. It was the steady hum of connection. It was the feeling of knowing you were exactly where you were supposed to be, with the person you were supposed to be with. The noise of the bar faded away, and it was just us. My quiet, unknowable God was just a man. My man. And he was looking at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. I realized then that clarity wasn't about being sober. It was about being seen. Truly, completely seen. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had finally designed a place where I belonged.